autumn of 1942, the British Prime Minister went to Russia to meet his allies.
Whatever our suffering, whatever our toils, we will continue hand in hand like comrades and brothers until every vestige of the Nazi regime has been beaten into the ground, until the memory only of it remains as an example and a warning for future time.
As he entered, the Prime Minister gave his famous V sign for the cameraman's benefit.
Behind the smiles, their alliance was acrimonious. Winston Churchill told Stalin there would be no second front in France to relieve the Red Army. And Hitler was throwing massive forces against the city which bore Stalin's name. Stalingrad fought for 5 long months from the autumn of 1942. Men battled for every street, every house, every brick. Stalin gave the order, not a step back. The city was in ruins, but Stalingrad was a splendid and symbolic victory for the Red Armed Forces, who now included a group of women fighting in the front line.
We were taken in to meet the commander. He asked, "Well, have you brought me any pilots?" They said, "Yes, here they are." "Strange," he said, "I don't see any pilots in here." I felt terrible. But on the next day, they sent me out into action. They transferred me onto fighter bombers, the Stormovik. The Stormovik is not a plane for ladies. It's armor-plated. It can take up to 600 kilos of bombs, and it carries 2 machine guns.
The bomber designer Tupolev spent his war making aeroplanes in a Stalinist prison. One of thousands of scientists like engineer Meir Mordukovich still in the camps as a result of the purges.
During the war in 1943, my prison sentence came to an end. A secret police chief came to see me. He said, "We can't let you go, Stalin's orders. While there's a war on, no release for prisoners guilty of your offense. When you're doing work you love, it's not so hard. You can sit over it all night long and still not get tired of it." So everybody worked with a will. And of course we realized we were working for the good of our country. The fact that we'd been arrested and put in prison didn't put us off. We were still patriots.
Stalin told the American ambassador, "We are under no illusion that they are fighting for us. They are fighting for Mother Russia." The greatest tank battle in history. Hitler had said, "The victory at Kursk must shine like a beacon to the world." He lost. It was the summer of 1943, the turning point. In the occupied areas, the party stepped up the organization of partisan bands among the civilian population. Soviet partisans were trained in sabotage and based in woodland hideouts. Germans killed thousands in reprisal. Hitler said, "The struggle against the partisans in the entire East is a life and death struggle in which one side or the other must be exterminated." The partisans became legendary for their valor and patriotism. But the woods of Belorussia and the Ukraine held another kind of partisan, another kind of patriot.
The Ukrainian insurgent army formed. I was one of the founders. It was conspiratorial, underground. But then open clashes with the Reds began. They started it. As the front got closer, Red partisans started to encroach on our territory. They attacked us. I was given the task of defending the borders of the forest. All our units moved into action against the Soviet troops. As we saw it, they were occupying our country.
Greece was arrested and sent to the camps. The tide was turning. The Red Army were welcomed in the Ukrainian city of Kharkov as liberators. Their first job was to smoke out the headquarters of the Nazi authorities which had held the town for 2 years. SS and Gestapo officers were put on public trial. Among the accused was Mikhail Bulanov, a Ukrainian collaborator. Bulanov confessed to taking part in the mass murder of women and children at the city hospital. 3 Nazis were sentenced to death alongside Bulanov, the collaborator. They had been responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of citizens. The Soviet liberation swept on. In the spring of 1944, the Red Army reached the Black Sea and the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimean Tatars had lived under German occupation for 2 years. German officers had courted the support of the Muslim population.
The population was very, very friendly because one of our first measures was to reopen the mosques, the Islamic churches, so to speak. That, of course, won the sympathy of the local population. The Tatars, of course, had to pay very heavily for their friendly attitude towards us.
The Crimean port of Sebastopol was liberated on May the 9th, 1944, after a ferocious battle. Nazi rule was over. The search for collaborators began. Everywhere in the south, liberation was followed by partisans coming down out of the hills to their newly liberated towns and villages. Even heroes like these fell under suspicion. This family of Tatars from the Crimea survived a terrible retribution.
It was the middle of the night, about 3 a.m. An officer and 2 soldiers came in. They gave us 15 minutes, that's all. Take only what you can carry, they said. You're to be exiled from the territory of the Crimea. We were shaking from head to foot with fear. We'd seen how the Germans threw live people, Jews and Crimeans, down the well. So when our own soldiers came, we were in such a state. Exile? Where to? We'll all be shot. I was saying, I'll take this with me. My sister threw it aside. She said, what are you taking that for? You're going to your death. But maybe we won't die, I said. We took whatever we could manage. There were only us women, no men, except the old ones. They loaded us all into wagons, cattle wagons.
Abliakimova and the entire Crimean Tatar nation were declared guilty of collaboration. Thousands died in the cattle wagons which expelled them from the Crimea to Siberia and Central Asia.
Уже 46 лет почти.
It's almost 46 years ago now, but I can still remember all the little sacks, the bundles, the packages which had been tied up in the Crimea. People never unpacked them. Everybody was hoping we'd be sent back.
Люди их не развязывали. Люди надеялись.
Every day we heard news, I don't know. Maybe they made it up because they wanted to believe it. But the news was always that we'd be going home, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow.
Что вот завтра нас увезут обратно, послезавтра.
By my calculations, 20,000 railway wagons were tied up for months, at a time when every effort was needed for fighting total war. But waste and cruelty combined were the hallmarks of high Stalinism. Just as individuals became unpersons in the terror of the 1930s, so now whole countries became unnations. The Crimean Tatars were written out of the history books. It was as though they had never existed.
1.5 million people from 8 small nations suffered the same punishment. These are the Kalmyk people who lived on the shores of the Caspian Sea. All the women and children were sent to Siberia. Their men were thrown out of the army. Lenin once said, "Kalmyk brothers, the entire past of your people is an uninterrupted chain of suffering." November 1944, the anniversary of the revolution, at the end of a year when almost all the empire was liberated. Victory was approaching. But several million men and women were in the hands of the Germans. Stalin regarded them all as traitors and dead men. His own son, Yakov, had died a prisoner of war. Soviet prisoners of war starved and died in Nazi camps. Millions were put to work or served in the German army. Some volunteered, some were forced. All were deemed traitors. Heroism in the field was no defense against the charge.
They shot at me again and again. My plane caught fire. I came round. I was falling out of the sky without a parachute. I lay on the ground. There was a German standing over me. He put his boot on my chest. But you know, the physical pain wasn't as bad as the emotional horror I felt. The horror that I was in the hands of the fascists. Better if they'd killed me. That's how I felt. They tried to get me up, but I kept falling. My leg was broken, my arm was broken, my legs were all burnt, my arms, my face, all burnt.
In January 1945, Timofeeva's prisoner of war camp was liberated by the Red Army. Still badly injured, she was interrogated on suspicion of spying.
It had been going on for 10 days, and that was it. I cracked. I ran upstairs. There was a guard, a soldier. He ran after me shouting, "Stop, or I'll shoot," but I ran on. I was out of my mind completely. I ran into the office of the major there and started screaming, "Shoot me, I can't stand it any longer. What happened to Soviet power? What's happened to it?"
One group of soldiers hoped to use the war to overthrow the injustice of Stalinism. The Russian Liberation Army was led by an idealistic Soviet captive, General Andrei Vlasov. His men wore the red, white, and blue of pre-revolutionary Russia, but they were part of the German army.
it was perhaps the last chance with arms to overthrow that terrible regime. Perhaps it was an illusion to consider ourselves as a independent army that will decide its own strategy and whatnot. Of course, we depended on the Germans, but there was no sense of collaborating with Germans. It was anti-Soviet and pro-Russian. It sounds like being very naive nowadays, but we hoped, some of us hoped, that this war cannot stop as where it stopped, because it was only half of the evil was destroyed.
The Red Army was 15 miles east of Berlin when the Führer emerged from his bunker to make his last public appearance with boys of the Hitler Youth. It was his 56th birthday, April the 20th, 1945. Half a million Red soldiers poured into the city. The Soviet propagandist Ilya Ehrenburg urged the troops on. All the trenches, graves and ravines filled with the corpses of innocents are advancing on Berlin. The dead are knocking at the doors. Whirl round in circles and burn and howl in your deathly agony. The hour of revenge has struck. As the red flag flew, the Führer and his new bride, Eva Braun, killed themselves. In Moscow, Sergeant Egorova was on telephone duty.
The sergeant major said, "What's up? An air raid?" "The war's over," I said. "Don't be stupid." "No, the war's over." And I ran off to the unit commander. The sergeant major was still standing there, wondering whether it was all true or if I'd gone mad. The commander came out. "What's happened?" he asked. I told him, "Comrade Captain, the war's over." All the girls started to screech. They flew towards me, hugged me, kissed each other, hugged each other, shouted, wept. That was how the war ended.
The 9th of May, 1945, Victory Day. It would be many years before the true horror of their wartime losses was revealed. After 1812, Russian soldiers presented the captured standards of Napoleon's army to the victorious Tsar Alexander I. In June 1945, Stalin stood in the pouring rain on the roof of Lenin's mausoleum as the Red Army threw the standards of the Wehrmacht at his feet. Among the returning heroes were Chuikov, victor of Stalingrad, Konev, first man into Berlin, Meretskov, savior of Leningrad. Stalin, generalissimo, his authority and prestige immeasurably swollen by victory. $20 million people had died. Soviet veterans take an enduring pride in the honor and achievement of their war against fascism. But in the Soviet Union, as everywhere in Europe, the survivors hoped for a new world.
Some people believe the victory over Hitler in some way redeems Stalin's barbarity. Many think he showed real talent as a war leader. I don't find either argument particularly helpful. The important thing is the Soviet people showed astonishing courage in the prosecution of their great patriotic war, and they were rewarded with what? With more of the same. For though the Soviet people won the war, the victor was Stalinism.
3 months before the war ended, Stalin played host to a crucial summit in the Crimean town of Yalta. At Yalta, the big three, Stalin, Roosevelt and Churchill, met to negotiate the shape of post-war Europe. Churchill asked Stalin privately what he should do about the Russian prisoners still held in the West. The official record says Marshal Stalin hoped they could be sent to Russia as quickly as possible. The agreement was kept secret. There were 100,000 Russian prisoners in Allied hands. Nearly 20,000 of them, Cossacks who had fought on the wrong side, were held in this camp in Austria. Some were not Soviet citizens at all, but émigrés. The British Foreign Secretary, Anthony Eden, said, "We cannot afford to be sentimental about this." British troops persuaded the Cossacks to hand in their guns. When the Cossacks realized what was happening, there were suicides. Men shot their families. Mothers drowned their babies. Allied troops put thousands onto trains and handed them over to the Red Army.
Those nice-looking American chaps, you know, with big sticks chasing these wretched people to the cars. And they simply, just like children, they didn't understand what they were doing. Well, grim faces, everything lost, you know. I have no will to do something about it, no will to fight back. There's no longer any fighting spirit, even for your survival, left. And they were herded just like a herd of sheep. And this is what they looked like.
And many loyal Soviet prisoners of war fared little better.
When they started organizing our departure, we all rejoiced. The war was over. We were going home. The Americans gave all the Soviet troops a little suitcase with clean linen, but we didn't get to keep them, of course. There was a bridge we had to walk over. We saw secret police troops standing on the other side. Some men threw themselves into the water. Some tried to stop them and said, "Take what you've got with you." We arrived. They began to unload us. An escort was waiting. We climbed off our train. We saw what was written on the side. Traitors to the homeland.
Drushkov was accused of spying. He got 10 years. The victory was so great, its price so terrible. There were happy endings. Fighter pilot Anna Timofeeva was rehabilitated.
My mother was told I'd been killed in action, and I was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union posthumously. And it was only in 1965 that the Supreme Soviet finally let me have my gold medal. Hero of the Soviet Union.
questions of today are, what comes next?
This is the Garden of Freedom in the center of the city. Here people come in droves to read nationalist newspapers, to buy nationalist artifacts, and to listen to nationalist speeches. Everyone wants independence from the Soviet Union. The only questions are how and when.
There's quite a trade in the blue and yellow of the Ukraine and the black and red of the militant nationalists, the colors of St. Vladimir, the patron saint. After years of official lies about the Ukraine's past, now she has a history again. In 1917, upon the Russian Revolution, some Ukrainians tried for independence. There was a government in Kiev, the Rada. But the Germans moved in, taking advantage of the chaos to expand their empire. They arrested the ministers and disbanded the parliament. Then came the Red Army, spearheading the Bolshevik takeover. This was the real disaster. Resistance by the Free Ukrainian Army lasted less than 2 years, and by 1920, the Ukraine's brief and bloody taste of independence was over. 10 years further on, Stalin tried to force farmers into collectives. The Ukrainian peasants resisted, so he starved them out. Their grain was taken at gunpoint. In the winter of 1932-33, there was the inevitable famine. Estimates of the dead vary. 6 million, 10 million. This is a land built on corpses. When the German army invaded in 1941, they shot and looted, and even maintained the hated collective farms. The Ukrainian insurgency army fought a partisan war in the hills, and they carried on their fight even after the Red Army pushed back the Germans. But the resistance finally ended in the early 50s when their leader, General Roman Shukhevich, was betrayed. The general's body was never recovered, so this grave in a village outside Lviv is only symbolic. But in recent months, it's become a shrine to a nationalist martyr. The general's son was just 13 when his father died, but he was already in prison just for being his father's son. He spent virtually the next 40 years in prison camps or exile. Conditions were so awful that he lost his sight 10 years ago. Now, both Yuri Shukhevich and the house where his father died have become symbols of the nationalist cause.
Хата зранку, то був до світа 5 березня, була оточена військами. І вони спробували вірватися. Вони постукали, зв'язкова відкрила двері. Вони схопили її за руки. І вона почала голосно з ними сваритися, щоб батько, який був на другому поверсі, почув і міг приготуватися. Потім вона почула кроки на сходах, що хтось збігає зі сходів. Роздався постріл, був вбитий один капітан, чекіст. А після цього ще роздались постріли. В результаті батько був тяжко поранений і, щоб не здатися большевикам до рук живих, застрілився. Я тоді вже 2 роки знаходився у в'язниці, і через кілька годин після смерті мого батька тіло привезли туди, в управління Державної безпеки, і мене возили на опізнання. Так що я бачив його через кілька годин після смерті.
I asked, had the events of the last year surprised him? Did he foresee an independent Ukraine in a year's time?
Я думаю, що так. То незалежність України – то є питання найближчого часу. Рік, максимум 2. Отже ж, що нас здивувало, в якій степені так, що то так досить несподівано прийшов той час. Але ми таки жили постійно з тою надією, що повинні бути зміни і великі зміни, які приведуть до кінця тої системи. Бо та система себе вижила. То було зрозуміло вже всім.
And part of that is because of education. For years, schools in the Ukraine taught mostly in Russian. Now, things are different. This is a Ukrainian language school, and today is the start of a school year. This year, for the first time, the ceremonies can be openly Ukrainian. Not just national dress and flowers for the teachers, but the old Ukrainian national flag and a national anthem that just a few years ago was condemned as bourgeois and anti-socialist and banned from public performance. The first day of school isn't usually a time for anything much more than, here we go again. This one is different. The headmaster himself was much moved.
Ми всі чекали з нетерпінням.
He told the children that their mothers and fathers and grandfathers had waited 70 years for the day. They, the children, would have a free Ukrainian future. Ukrainians throw themselves into patriotic ceremonies these days, and being Slavs, they make a great fuss of children. They're generous with ritual present-giving, even though life is hard for everyone.
Давайте звернемося до наших прекрасних письменників.
They take education very seriously, aware that it will be up to the youngest generation to remake the Ukraine. The language suffered centuries of repression and contempt. Both the Poles and the Russians dismissed it as a peasant language, certainly not something to be educated in. In the 30s, and again in the 60s, the native intelligentsia was wrecked by imprisonment and internal exile. But in the last 2 years, the exiles have started to come back, and with them has come serious political action. The democratic parties have joined forces in a new movement, Ruch, the Ukrainian version of the popular fronts that have swept to power in other once Soviet republics. With the first free elections in March of this year, Ruch burst upon the scene. Wherever the elections were genuinely free, and that was far from being everywhere, there was a landslide. In Kiev, the Democrats won 18 out of 22 seats. In Ivano-Frankivsk, 11 out of 12. And in Lviv region, they took all 24 seats on the council. So in one bound, the council went from complete communist control to complete non-communist control. Like so many dissidents, Dari Futursky is a physicist and mathematician. He doesn't much care for politics, but felt obliged to play his part in the new order. His office sports an agreeably surreal little number. Lenin, the great helmsman, apparently relieving himself upon the wall. Pulling fun, rather than making war, is the stock in trade of the new order. But here are people with a lot to forgive.
Волосся стає дибом, що тут робилося. Ви собі не уявляєте. Скільки тут було крові, скільки тут було жертв. І я вам чесно скажу, що треба молитися на терпеливість ось нашого народу, який, незважаючи на це все, ще знаходить ті всі то добре відношення, не відмітає то все старе, як то кажуть, і не йде зброєю в руках мститися, а навпаки забуває про то кроваве минуле і ганебне минуле, так? І робить оці ось всі кроки для побудови щасливого майбутнього. Розуміти, пам'ять мусить існувати, але ця пам'ять мусить бути спрямована на то, щоб ми тільки не повторяли тих помилок, а будували насправді майбутнє.
One floor up, the Communist Party, well and truly rejected by the people, still functions in well-upholstered bunker country. Its links with Moscow, the army and the KGB still going strong. It will not speak to the BBC, but turns its back on the mess its one-time victims must now sort out. One such is a heroic man, Vyacheslav Chornovil. As in other parts of Eastern Europe, we've seen statesmen emerge all of a sudden, like a Fidelio chorus, from prison to power overnight. Chornovil's writing earned him 18 years in prison and exile. Now here he is, transformed, chairman of the council and, so we heard, quoted for even higher office. I asked, was His Excellency on the way to being first president of a free Ukraine?
Ви знаєте, все може бути. Хто думав раніше, що ще кілька років тому, що політв'язень, десь гнаний, стане головою обласної ради і депутатом Верховної Ради. От так стрімко розвиваються події, імперія так швидко розвалюється, ось комунізм так швидко показав свою неспроможність і так швидко тоне.
I wondered, how did he feel about the communists? Was he afraid of a backlash?
Я думаю, що як імперія остаточно почне розвалюватися і республіки почнуть ставати самостійними державами, то Горбачов покаже своє обличчя імперіаліста. Бо при всьому його лібералізмі він все-таки є поборник збереження і зміцнення імперії. Тільки на новому такому ліберальному витку, так би мовити, розвитку історії. Немає дня, щоб у республіканських партійних органах не було проти нас якихось статей. Причому там перебріхують факти, наклепи на нас. От. Час від часу проти нас виступає центральна преса, там «Правда» і інші газети, розумієте. Ось. Настроюють проти нас населення, там, що зображують нас, що в нас тут якась мало не братовбивча війна йде, що в нас тут є якісь зіткнення між національностями, чого в нас немає. От. Що ми тут мало не переслідуємо комуністів. Ми їх не переслідуємо, ми просто з ними не співпрацюємо. Але, так би мовити, якогось цькування комуністів, так як вони колись цькували нас, немає в нас, розумієте. От така пропагандистська атака. І ми боїмося, оскільки в нас демократичні процеси поглиблюються, що це може закінчитися, що це ведеться підготовка до введення якогось або окремої форми правління в Західній Україні, ну, я знаю, може навіть військового становища, або що вони можуть і на це піти, коли побачать, що за нами пішла вся Україна. Я не думаю, що Горбачов піде на те, щоб Україні дозволити, ну, з власної охоти. Може, його заставить історія, заставить те, що відбувається навколо. Але щоб він хотів дати Україні самостійність, я ніколи цього не подумаю. Ще він може це з Литвою такий експеримент провести, з Латвією, з Естонією чи з Грузією. Ну, Україна з її величезним потенціалом економічним, відділення від Союзу повне, все-таки йому дуже того не хотілося. Дуже того не хотів. Так що він не буде йти нам на зустріч, тільки можемо ми самі його примусити, так би мовити, поступатися.
It's just after dawn in this beautiful city. The daily trudge hasn't started yet. People will still be at home struggling with a water supply that functions intermittently at best. But now the day begins with a certain amount of hope, and at last with a newspaper that is worth reading. Soviet newspapers used to be a wonderful mixture of platitude and lie, nonsense upon stilts, you might say. Now there's «За вільну Україну». It means «for a free Ukraine». It started just a few weeks ago. It prints such bits of the truth as its journalists can get at, on such bits of paper as it can wrest from the communist powers that were, who still control the paper supply. The paper only has permission to produce 120,000 copies a day. They could sell 3 times that number, so you have to queue up at dawn to make sure of your copy. The people just don't want the old acres of gobbledygook. It's all rubbish, the man says, referring to Moscow's Izvestia. The editorial offices are in a modest back street in the city centre. Inside, it's a scene of amateur enthusiasm with not a fax machine in sight. It's something of a miracle that the paper has appeared at all. The bosses at the communist-controlled printing plant needed their arms twisted before they'd have anything to do with it.
І нас підтримали друкарі, робітничий клас. І сказали так, або буде газета ця народна, або ми страйкуємо, і ні одна газета, ні московська, ні київська не вийде. І тоді я їду на переговори в ЦК КПСС. Ну і вони спочатку з таким імперським пафосом якось хотіли на мене давити. Ну, але я їм так сказав, що хлопці, оце в мене в кишені ключ від страйкому. А це я скажу друкарям, що хлопці, пора, на роботу не виходить. І ні одна ваша газета не вийде. 4 мільйони, не вийде, не дійде. Ну, тут, так сказати, вони були притиснуті в кут не нами, а народом. І дали дозвіл на вихід нашої газети. Ми є основний засіб, бо ми воюємо за державу не шаблями, як козаки колись воювали, не кулеметами, і не рушницями, як це робили січові стрільці чи бійці Української повстанської армії, а воюємо виключно словом. Тому ми себе мислимо на передовій, і наша ціль політична, і кредо – незалежна українська держава.
Like every Soviet city, Lviv has the compulsory statue of Lenin in the main square. Or it did have. Shortly after we left, the people of the city finally did what they'd been threatening to do for months. Vladimir Ilyich was consigned to the back of a lorry. It's clear then that the Western Ukraine already sees itself as part of Europe. But what about the East, where the language and culture are Russian? Is it really part of the Ukraine? Zaporozhye was once the headquarters of the Cossacks, one of the great Ukrainian historical sites. There was a nationalist demonstration here recently, and there's a lot to demonstrate about. For the Cossacks' Hollywood hideout is now a dump. There are lots of ways to get yourself poisoned here, and most, but not all of them, come down from the heavens. Zaporozhye is a miserable place to visit. To live in it can be fatal. Alexander Nikudov is a doctor and a member of the local council. His patient was an army reservist who was ordered to help clear up after Chernobyl. Now he's suffering the first signs of radiation poisoning, and the local health service just can't cope.
Так, со спиртом, Юля. Со спиртом, шарик. Ну, естественно, в больной природе не может быть здорового человека. И мы, к нашему сожалению, видим изменение здоровья наших жителей. У нас проводил исследование Киевский институт гигиены имени Марзеева. Также они прогнозируют, что если не будет немедленно улучшения, то к 2000 году средняя продолжительность жизни в городе Запорожье уменьшится на 3 года. И у нас в настоящее время только 20% детей, которые рождаются, считаются условно здоровыми, а все остальные с той или иной патологией. И это есть не что иное, как вырождение, которое уже началось, потому что у этих больных детей, когда они вырастут, будут рождаться тоже больные дети. И вот такое, я бы сказал, самоубийство, война, объявленная самим себе с применением боевых отравляющих веществ. И результат и жертвы налицо.
I asked the doctor what should be done to clean up the environment.
Надо, во-первых, понижать промышленную нагрузку до тех размеров и объемов, которые позволяет природная среда. Переходить на новые безотходные и малоотходные технологии, которые уже существуют, но которые у нас, к сожалению, с большим трудом внедряются. Нужно расширять санитарные зоны вокруг предприятий. Ну, а наиболее вредные вообще не имеют права на существование. Их надо закрывать.
They might start the closures with these aged blast furnaces. Once upon a time, they were a showcase for socialism, but they've really created the last Dickensian proletariat. Still, with 16,000 people working in the plant and no money for investment, drastic remedial action isn't on hand.
Этот вопрос затрагивает меня не только как одного из руководителей комбината, но как и жителя города Запорожье. Я и сам лично на себе ощущаю влияние экологии, неблагополучной обстановки экологической, которую создает наш комбинат. Чтобы сейчас говорить, чья вина Запорожстали, руководителей, которые управляли Запорожсталью, или руководителей города, республики или страны, я думаю, что мы сейчас не собираемся делать оценку, кто виноват. Мы сейчас идем по тому пути, чтобы убрать, значит, вредные выбросы с нашего производства. Приняли такую программу, чтобы создать производство экологически чистое.
Экологию мы можем спасти только, если мы будем сами хозяевами, сами работать на себя, то мы тогда самоубийцами не будем. Потому что сейчас парадоксальная ситуация. Все наши заводы, предприятия в городе Запорожье управляются из Москвы. Они нам не принадлежат. А что такое для министра жители города Запорожья? Это такое же, как станок или плавильная печь, средство получения металла из руды. Не более того. Его наше здоровье не волнует. И здесь мы можем надеяться только на себя. И здесь независимость и самостоятельность, конечно, необходима.
Russian cooking once had a good line in fish, and these fishermen here on the Dnieper are busy. but a lot of people won't touch their stuff. 400 miles upriver, there's a tributary of the Dnieper called the Pripyat.